and Doughtey. Right there. Hi guys! So the Death Salon was technically a 3-day event. So the Death Salon was a 3-day event that centered all around death. I only attended 2 days of it. Well, the first day of it was a walking tour of Philadelphia death spaces, and that was a separate price from the rest of the ticket. It was like $35, and if I hadn't had to work, I wish I would have gone on that too, because it sounds like it was awesome, but it was like a walking tour of all these different cemeteries in Philadelphia. Also, it was the night of the Death Masquerade Ball, which I also did not attend. So it was Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. I didn't go Sunday. I got into Philly Sunday night. Monday, it was all these different talks from 9 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and they do a break about every 40 minutes, so the talks were like 20 minutes-ish each, and then we had a break, so we do 2 talks, break, 2 talks, lunch break, which was like an hour and a half, then another 2 talks, break, another 2 talks, and then they had, Monday night they had musicians come in and do these death ballads, and they brewed a specific beer for us using rosemary from the medicinal garden of the Mutter Museum. I didn't go to that though, because I didn't feel like going and drinking somewhere by myself in Philadelphia. That just didn't seem smart to me, because I went by myself. Then Tuesday was the same thing: talks, break, talks, lunch, talks, break, talk. At 8 o'clock that night, at a different pub, they were going to do Death Quizzo, and they were going to give prizes out for that. And I didn't go to that either because I had to leave right after the Death Salon let out. And then in between, during the breaks, there was always this thing called the Dark Artisans Bazaar, and they sold like all kinds of death-related things. This is the Artist Alley. Those are urns. People had made art out of Spies. Is that all made of hair right there?
From Bavaria, about 1870.
That is the coolest thing. And then that's made of hair too, that one right there?
Mm-hmm. And so is this one right here.
Oh, that's really cool.
And it's our hair right there.
That's cool. This is made of hair too?
It is.
Gorgeous.
No way.
It's such beautiful condition.
Yeah. I'm holding human hair.
Yeah, I have a couple of pieces.
That's
at
hair
home.
too?
We have hundreds and hundreds of pieces.
That's so cool. Some of the stuff was really cool. I just didn't have enough spending money to buy, like, anything. So I didn't get anything from the Artisans Bazaar, but I thought it was still really cool. Something that was really cool about the whole experience was we were allowed to video and take pictures as much as we wanted to. I just personally did not, because I kind of want to stay in the moment. But I could have recorded the entire Death Salon if I really wanted to. So the first day of talks, they had a medical examiner. They had 2 girls that were talking about what they were doing to rejuvenate the cemetery. This really huge, really gorgeous cemetery that I really wanted to see, but it closes at 4:30, so I didn't get to see it. The efforts they were doing to rejuvenate that cemetery. There's this one guy, and I wasn't really fond of his things. There was a couple things, like, I didn't love every single thing. In fact, I could tell the times when I was not interested in something because I was very aware that I needed to move around a lot more. Like, I just kept shifting in my seat in all these different positions, and I was sure I was angering other people around me. Like, every time somebody sat near me, I was like, oh, buddy, I'm really sorry. But there was a guy who kind of, I guess, goes around and collects these wax molds, like, of anatomy. Like, they would take a dead body, pour wax over it, and then paint it later, or whatever, or put different color wax to, like, to use for studying anatomy. And he goes around and collects them, and he also makes art out of taking skulls and disarticulating them. Like, he'll do an exploding skull thing, so it's like the different parts of the skull are kind of sitting on one stationary thing. And he does, like, he'll cut it into pieces, like, very specific patterns, and then kind of, like, swing it out. And I wasn't too fond of that. It kind of sounded like he was bragging most of the time, really, because he didn't really say what he did for a living. He was just like, oh, I collect this. It was very expensive. I collect this, and it was very expensive. I'm probably being too harsh, but I just was not a fan. After him, they had a lady who talked about what they're doing in certain, in at least her museum to conserve mummies that they have, and like what they do to try to conserve them and get more people to like view them from the public. Um, After that, there was like a panel about different death spaces. There was this one about the Anatomy Act of 1867. A talk about that. That involved like prisoners from Eastern State Penitentiary and how they used to use their body. If somebody died there, they used to use their body to go take them out and go practice dissection over at like the Mutter Museum. There was a guy who talked about his travels in Indonesia and how they interacted with the corpses there. And then at the end, they talked about how many books that are bound with human skin. I believe there's 18. And the Mutter Museum has 5 of them. That's the first day. I'll tell you what I learned in the first day, and then I'll move on to the second day. So the first day, what I learned. The first talk was the medical examiner, so I learned a lot in just her specific talk. She was saying how murder isn't common. Like, a lot of the people that end up on her autopsy table die from suicide, old age, natural causes, drugs, pretty much also doing something that they weren't supposed to do. Usually if you die, it's because of something you're not supposed to do, like drugs, or you weren't wearing your seatbelt, or you got in a fight with somebody over something stupid. But she said she doesn't get a lot of people that die from murder there. That's kind of why the media sensationalizes it, because it's something that doesn't happen too often. Out of the people who do get murdered, overwhelmingly, it's women who are murdered by their partner. And she even said, she was like, okay, ladies, look to your left, look to your right. One of you will be murdered by your partner, which I thought was insane. And like, she had this little chart of like people who die by murder. It was like strangers and murdered by your partner and stuff like that. And it was like, the first one was people who are murdered by their partner, and like males down here, and females like this. And that is the highest amount out of all the people who are murdered by other stuff. That was like the largest number. So it's the people that you trust the most that kill you the most, apparently. She also had a chart of like the drugs that are killing people the most aren't heroin and meth. It's opiates, stuff like Percocet, Vicodin, OxyContin. So like painkillers. They come from the same plant as heroin, but they're different. And the reason they're killing people more is because they are cheaper to get. A lot of people can just go get them from their doctor, and they don't even have to pay for them if they have good insurance. They're also a lot easier to get because you don't have to go find somebody on the street to get them. But she also had a chart for this, and it was like people killed by heroin, people killed by like other drugs, people killed by opioids. It was insane. And it's a lot of people, they like might turn to heroin after they are done with opiates, because the high from opiates doesn't like, you build up a tolerance to it more, so then they'll switch to heroin. Also, usually people won't report, like news networks won't report if like people are being killed by heroin, because a couple years ago in Philadelphia they had a bad like there was a huge patch of people that were getting killed by a bad batch of heroin, and then right after that there was more reported deaths and more reported people buying heroin after that, because they figured that like the law wasn't going to be watching as much, because people weren't going to be buying heroin as much because it was a bad batch, or maybe they thought it would be better quality because there's stuff mixed in it. I don't know, but there was huge increase in people dying and buying heroin. So now news networks, like local ones anyway, aren't really allowed to report if bad batches of heroin are going around, or like drugs are getting mixed with stuff and going around. Another interesting thing, she can usually tell if you've committed suicide by the contents in your stomach. Say if you drink or if you take a bunch of drugs, if there's an inordinate amount in there, usually it means you were trying to commit suicide. You weren't just trying to get high. Like if there's a huge amount, or if there's this little thing that's in the bottle of pills, it's got like I don't know if it's like a thing to keep them fresh, or just to let you know, like, hey, this is the kind of bottle, this is the kind of drugs. It's like this little cylinder. I've seen it a couple times, but sometimes she'll find that in people's stomachs, and she know they killed themselves because they'll just have tipped the whole bottle back without thinking there's something else in there, and it'll end up in the stomach. So I thought that was really interesting. The guy who went to Indonesia, I think it was. He was talking about how their relationship with death is way different from ours. And like they'll take a relative out or somebody in their family, whoever has died that's close to them. They'll keep them in their house for a little while. They'll usually inject them. They won't do the heavy embalming process like we do, but they do put like formalin or some kind of embalming fluid in the veins, but not to the extent that we do, just to like keep them around a little longer. Because what they do with their dead is they like will keep them around their house, and then they'll take them out and dress them, and then they'll like walk around with them a little bit, and then they'll go put them back. They might have dinner with them, and then they bury him for a couple of weeks, and then take him back out. And the guy, when he went to go photograph this one village, they were like, "Hey, we actually have our grandmother next door in the hut next to us. Do you want to come meet her?" And so that's how kind of shows how vastly different the way that some cultures and our American culture view and live alongside death, which I thought was really interesting. So something else I learned the first day of the Death Salon. They were talking about death spaces. They had like a panel on it. And they were talking about I guess what defines a death space is like places where there's a lot of bodies buried. So like technically, the battlefields of Gettysburg would be a death space, and they actually talked about that a little bit. One interesting fact that came up during that talk was that the KKK, their uniforms, how they got started, were they used to people who were racist against black people, and then who were angry at former slaves that were freed after the Civil War. They would dress up like ghosts and go to these people's houses and pretend to be spirits of dead Confederate soldiers or dead Union soldiers or whatever, and they would haunt these former slaves, and they would keep this bag in the front of their uniform, and they would ask for like big buckets of water, and then they would guzzle them down and pretend to drink them, but like because there were such huge quantities, it made them seem like supernatural that they could finish them, but really it was just like a kind of illusion thing. But I thought that was interesting. Also, when they're talking about death spaces. So if you don't know what a potter's field is, potter's fields are places where you're buried if you are homeless or nobody comes to claim you, or you have enough money to afford a funeral, they'll dump you in a potter's field. And pretty much all the major parks in New York City were potter's fields before they became parks. Bryant Park, Washington Square Park, and I believe there's another park. They still have bodies underneath them because they couldn't excavate all of them because they were just like were massed in there. But there's this other one called Hart Island, and that's still around, and it's just specifically an island just for it's a potter's field still, and it's still being used. The big controversy with it though is there's about like 1 million people buried there, but they're buried there by Rikers Island prisoners. It's like a job that prisoners can do, and it's not accessible to the public. It's only if you take a Department of Corrections boat out there. And the big thing is like it should be open to the public, and people are upset that it's not, and they're just now finding out about this. But also when you go to the island on a Department of Corrections vehicle thing, they treat you like a prisoner. You have to follow the same rules as a prisoner. They watch you like you're a prisoner, and then they only let you go into this one gazebo. Say you have like a loved one passed away, you think that they might have been buried there, like they were homeless, or say you were a young mother like lost a baby and you couldn't afford a funeral. They'll be like, "Hey, do you want the city to give your child or loved one a burial?" And you'll say yes, and that's where they end up. If you want to go visit these remains, you have to go to this, like they take you out on this boat, you sign all these forms, treated like a prisoner. You go out to this gazebo, and they'll bring you some kind of remains. They may not be who you're looking for, and it's these huge. What they put the bodies in is these huge 8-foot trenches that they just put mass graves in, and there's no ceremony or anything. So that's the big controversy with it. They're trying right now to make it open to the public so that anybody can just go there and visit and pay their respects and not jump through hoops. As far as the books bound in human skin thing goes, the Mutter Museum does have 5 of them, and they were talking about like the tests they do to determine if a book is in fact bound in human skin or if it's something else. Usually it tends to be like sheepskin or a mix of 2 different skins like leather and whatever, but the human skin books, it's weird because they had them on display and they did not look anything different from any other like old library book. I couldn't even tell which part was skin. But but usually they said that people, some people have, like, they want to be used as skin books when they're dead, and they want like their story written down in there. One prisoner had his book made into skin, and then his crimes were talked about inside the book that he bound. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So the second day of talks was Ritual and Art of Child Death in Mexico, which sounds really morbid, but it's not, and I'll explain later. There's a class that's taught at the Keene University. I believe it's in Boston or New Jersey, somewhere. To get into the class, there's a 3-year waiting list, and they're actually going to make it into an NBC show soon. There was another talk about incorrupt saints, which is where, like, sometimes people who have been put into sainthood, their bodies don't decompose like normal bodies do, and so it was kind of like debunking like why some do, why some don't. This other guy, he takes skulls, and he'll take like the whole image of a skull, and he'll take one side and then mirror on the other so it looks like a perfect symmetrical skull. And he does art like that. This other woman was talking about mother died in the process of going through that as a doctor because she was a doctor. When the second last talk was the director of the Mutter Museum was talking about museums' relationships with death and like how we should like show off the dead in museums and like how we should be respectful and stuff like that. And the last talk was about dying as transsexuals and like how to preserve their identity in death. And then the very last thing of the day was a panel between Caitlyn Doughtey, which if you haven't seen her channel, she does Ask a Mortician. She was there, and I got to meet her. She did a live, she was one of the organizers of the event, so she was the MC. She would ask questions, and it was so cool because she was there like a lot. She wasn't just like, I'm Caitlyn Doughtey, and here's my thing. She was like a part of it the whole time, so it was so cool. She did a live Ask a Mortician where like at the beginning of the Death Salon, people put in their questions into a jar, and her and a girl named Sherry Booker, who wrote a book about working in funeral homes in Baltimore, they did like a live Ask a Mortician with each other, and that was the last event of the day. What I learned from day 2. First talk was really good. It was about the rituals of child deaths in Mexico. There's a woman named Sarah Troop. She actually started the Order of the Good Death, which is they put the Death Salon together. Caitlyn Doughtey from Ask a Mortician is part of it, pretty much bolstering death positivity and like making people less scared of death, and that's pretty much the whole Order of the Good Death is about. She lost a child. I believe she miscarried is what she was kind of dancing around, but she had a miscarriage, and she said there was a lot of silence around the issue. Like nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew really what to do. I had to help. But in Mexican culture, and she's part Mexican, they have a lot more ways of dealing with the loss of a child. In their culture, the godmother dresses the newly dead child. They have like a crown that they wear, the children do. And they put on these like special outfits for the viewing, and so the godmother does that. The godfather organizes the whole funeral, and for them in Mexican culture, they become cherubs, like the souls of dead children. I guess if they're below a certain age, like 8 or something, a child dies, their soul becomes a cherub, like a baby angel kind of, and they come back and like that's how you talk to God, like you talk to the baby angel, and then it goes and relays a message to God. And so they kind of want those spirits around all the time. So after the funeral, they set up an altar where you can sit, and it's pretty much like a family reunion. You bring toys, and then like your family members are gathered around, and it's pretty much you kind of being there for the spirit of the dead child and like entertaining it. It's also like a way that they grieve, you know, and that they feel like they haven't lost that child. So I thought that was really interesting, and especially because I know somebody who's had a miscarriage before, I never really realized how much she probably had to hold in her grief because it makes people so uncomfortable, and people don't really know what to say if you've lost a child in general, but also a newborn, because like how do you handle Mother's Day and all that, but we just kind of brush it under the rug and don't think about it, and so it made me really think about her. The second talk of day 2 was about the death class, and this was by far, I think, one of my favorite talks of the whole thing. It made me tear up. What the death class is, the lady who started it, she said she grew up in a very violent home where she didn't know if she was going to be alive from one day to the next. That's how abusive her house was. And so she kind of grew up really close to death in a way. And then she became a nurse, so she also her ongoing relationship with death continued. She got like different degrees, and she became a teacher of this class. And they do a lot of field trips in the class. It's a very like hands-on class. They do writing and stuff too, but it's a lot of like journaling and like your experiences, how you feel about them before and then after experience. But they go on field trips to funeral homes, hospice care. They go to prisons to talk to murderers. They go and you pretty much plan your whole funeral. They take you to write up a will. They have this thing called this like rock garden, and it's this rock. It's like this fairly small amount of space, but it's dirt, and then there's this rock circle, and you follow the circle, and in the middle you lay down something that's a burden to you, because in the Buddhist belief system, they say if you go in a circle long enough, when you get to the middle, you'll be able to lay your burden down. And so people will take and like walk in that circle and they'll lay a rock down with something like the death of somebody close to them, or their anger, or their past, or whatever, something that is being a burden to them, they'll lay it down. It's about becoming comfortable with death and also making the most out of your life. From this death class, they formed a volunteer group called Be the Change, and what they'll do like a bunch of projects. Like they'll take meals to elderly people. They started a teen homeless shelter. They'll go to the areas in Newark, New Jersey, which if you don't know anything about Newark, New Jersey, the one thing you should know is that it's a very violent, gang-ridden place. And what they'll do is find the most violent streets that people live on and have the most murders, and they'll go and plant a garden there. Because a lot of the kids in that neighborhood don't get to go outside ever because they're worried about getting shot. And so that's like the one chance they get. Like kids will come out of their house and help them build this garden or turn it into like a small park or set like a swing set up there. But they'll take like any small patch of land that they can that's not owned by somebody in these death streets, and they'll build. And it was just so inspiring. One thing I learned that was very interesting, she was saying as a nurse, she learned that crying isn't a sign of weakness. It actually kickstarts your immune system into the healing process, in like it'll release white blood cells. And so she thinks that men don't live as long as women because they're taught to not cry and not show weakness, but they also can't jumpstart their immune systems enough. But that whole talk was just like mind-blowing and really cool. As far as the talk with the doctor who was a daughter going through the process of her mother dying, I thought it was pretty interesting because she talked about how in the health system they didn't talk about quality of life with her mother, as far as like, hey, if you do this treatment, like, is this going to make you more comfortable? Is this going to help you live longer? They pretty much just like shoved treatments down her mother's throat and didn't talk about quality of life. Like, is this really the best life that we can be giving you, until it was during the hospice stage. I think it's, if you're going through like a long illness, it's interesting to bring up in the beginning, like, hey, is this really gonna give me the best quality of life? I don't mean like, is like what I'm gonna go through gonna really bring me the life that I want in the end, or is this gonna just perpetuate me dying? Because a lot of people seek those treatments because they just don't want to die. So the last talk of the day for the Death Salon before the Q&A thing was a woman who is the editor for Penthouse magazine. She was talking about different people who they lived their life as a man or a woman, but then when they died, the first person was named Jennifer something, and then when she died, they had her funeral and obituary as a man, which is the way she was born, and people were outraged about that. She had another story about a man who lived his life as a man, but then when he died, they did his funeral stuff and all that stuff as like obituary and stuff like that as a woman, because that's how he was born. And so she was talking about how there's not much legislation or talk in the funeral industry about how to handle transgender stuff. And so it was like how to prepare, like if that is your lifestyle, how to prepare before your death, because a lot of people just think that she's talked to who are transgender just think that their partner is just going to be able to take care of it, or like they'll have that stuff together in time. But it was a useful talk, not just if you're transgender, because it is about like getting your affairs in order way beforehand. And because if you put in your will like, hey, this is how I want my service to go out, they don't look at your will till after your funeral when it's kind of already a done deal. But it was really cool because this one lawyer she talked to was like, hey, do you know of any legislations in any states where they talk about like, this is what I want done with my body, and like this is specifically who I want to carry it out? And he's like, no, but you know what, I'm gonna start writing that paper up. And so he has these documents that we were allowed to go get, and there was a code form. If you went to the Death Salon, you could get these documents for free, and all you have to do is get them notarized. But pretty much it's like, hey, this is who I want to take care of my affairs when I die, this is how I want them to go be played out. And it's not something you like to think about, but if you think about it more often, it's not as scary. Something else I wanted to mention, these really weird things kept happening during the Death Salon. They weren't weird, they were cool, but like it was weird how they tied in with like the Death Salon itself while it was going on. One thing that was really cool, and I wanted to see these before, we found out right down the street underneath this bridge was a Before I Die wall. And they didn't do it for the Death Salon. It was already there. It wasn't done by the Death Salon people. It was just there. And I thought that was really cool that it just so happened to be there. For me, though, it was like the perfect bow on the whole thing. Like, it was exactly what the Death Salon felt like and meant to me. It's like, go into a race. You know there's a finish line, but that's not exactly the whole point. Like, yeah, you want to get the race over with, and yeah, there's like an end point. You focus on the race itself, not necessarily the finish line. It's kind of like how the Death Salon was. Yes, death is the end, but you don't have to be afraid of it just because it's there. You kind of learn to live alongside it. And for me, that's how like the Before I Die wall is. It's like living your life to the fullest and thinking about the future because it's the future, not because that there's an end to it. Also on day one of the Death Salon, at the end, probably while it was going on, but I didn't find out till the end of the day. Caitlyn Doughtey had been working on getting support for a bill to be put into law that allows you to, if you are like gravely ill or something, to take your own life. And that bill went through and it became a law in California, which I think is amazing. Like, even if you're not pro-assisted suicide, it isn't assisted suicide, really. It's, you have to go, if you're terminally ill, like, you have less than 6 months to live, you can go to a doctor and they'll, like, give you prognosis, like, yeah, you know, maybe you'd be better off. Like, yes, you are gravely ill. They give you, one doctor has to give you the okay, like, yes, it's okay for you to go end your life if you feel that's necessary from a medical standpoint. Then you have to go to a second doctor and they have to review the same information and see, like, if you are terminally ill. And then I believe you're prescribed medication too if you need to end your own life. Another thing that happened, and this one kind of gives me chills. Day 2 of the Death Salon, the very last talk of the day was about people who die, who are transgender, how their funerals and stuff are carried out. Tuesday morning of the Death Salon, a transgender person was killed in Philly, which is tragic, but it was just really weird timing how, like, that day we were talking about it, and then we find out that a transgendered person was murdered.